Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. No goods, no bads, although there's certainly elements of both today, but it's all crazy martinis for conservatives across the board. And we should point out, in case anyone's wondering, yes, 2-hour delays again in our respective counties, so our kids pretty much get the mornings off. Jim, I guess we're getting used to it by now.
I was going to say, it's winter. You know, you can't have kids going to school in winter.
On to our martinis today. Let's go to an interesting conversation that took place between CNN commentator Areva Martin and Sirius XM host David Webb, who's also a host for Fox Nation, and he's a commentator pretty frequently on Fox News, so you probably know who he is. Anyway, he has Areva Martin on his Sirius XM show, and this transpires as they talk about privilege.
I've chosen to cross different parts of the media world, done the work so that I'm qualified to be in each one. I never considered my color the issue. I considered my qualifications the issue.
Well, David, you know, that's a whole nother long conversation about white privilege and things that you have the privilege of doing that people of color don't have the privilege of.
How do I have the privilege of white privilege?
David, by virtue of being a white male, you have white privilege. This whole long conversation, I don't have time to get into
Areva, I hate to break it to you, but you should have been better prepped. I'm black.
Okay.
And then
I was like, what do you do in that? Here's after I had a chance to hang out with David Webb a couple of years back, I think right before the vice presidential debate in Farmville, Virginia. Back in 2016. He was hanging out with Cam Edwards on the Sirius satellite radio crowd. Well, David Webb is from Boston, and I guess you can kind of hear it from his accent there. So, yeah, I'm sure there's been a bunch of people who've listened to Webb on the radio and said some version of like, oh, wow, you know, not expected. They're picturing a guy who looks like he should be in the stands of a Red Sox game, or that jerk who throws beer at you because the Patriots rock, or something like that. And they're not picturing an African-American gentleman. But that's who he is. And I think it's, I think it indicates something about how rote and reflexive these accusations about white male privilege have gotten on the left. I also think, by the way, this is kind of a cautionary tale for cable news producers. Look, when possible, I always like it when I can go to the studio. You see somebody across the table from you. I think you generally get better interactions, though the Lord knows there are plenty of exceptions. When you're doing everybody's in a different studio, and you're in this little tiny room with a camera in front of you, and sometimes they have the monitor on, sometimes they don't. You don't know who you're talking to, and you could have a situation where she's simply making that assumption. So good laugh enjoyed by everyone. I think there was also another example of these kind of stuff. Travis Smiley had, who's the comedian who just got in trouble?
Kevin Hart.
No, the other one.
Louis C.K.
Louis C.K. That doesn't narrow it down. I was thinking of the initials. And I'm like, so Louis C.K. Apparently Louis C.K. is of Hispanic heritage, is Latino. Now, if you have a perception in your mind of what Latinos look like, maybe Louis C.K. doesn't match that. But he said something about Latinos during an interview, and Travis Smiley was like, well, what would you know about the Latino experience? And, and Louis C.K. answers, I'm Latino. And, I guess when you go by your latter two initials, people may not jump to that kind of conclusion about something like that. So just kind of a good cautionary tale of not to make too many assumptions about how you're about who you're talking to. And this is one more reason why identity politics is probably inherently toxic and corrosive, because you start seeing people as a group of classifications and not as the human beings that they actually are.
Very good point. But in particular, David Webb follows up on this. Here's another quick clip, and watch how she responds to this.
You come with this assumption, and you go to white privilege.
David,
that's actually insulting.
It is, and I apologize because my people gave me wrong information. They told me
the whole white privilege thing is insulting.
David, can I apologize and correct the record? I want to apologize.
Oh, so we got to blame the people.
Don't interrupt me while I'm apologizing to you.
The problem is that, okay, well, I guess you earned it, David, but if you had been white, then you didn't.
I'm sorry, you only have male privilege. Maybe she would accuse him of having black male privilege. You know, can we go through life and can we just make the observation? A whole bunch of people in life have some sort of privilege, right? Check your privilege is a really snotty and obnoxious saying. When you say to somebody, count your blessings, it's very similar sentiment, but actually it's much more accurate. You might have the privilege or the blessing of two parents that love you. Some folks in this world don't get that. Maybe you grew up in a safe neighborhood. A bunch of people don't get that. Grew up healthy. All of us have some privilege. All of us have something in life that turned out well for us that didn't turn out well for somebody else. And yeah, it's good to have that in mind, particularly when dealing with other groups who didn't have that particular advantage or something like that. But man, oh man, it can get really insufferable really quickly. And, kind of fun to watch a lefty pundit step in it so vividly and on such a big stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm surprised she didn't pivot to toxic masculinity, honestly. So I guess she deserves one molecule of credit there. But some poor staffer is going to get reamed out for saying, hey, you're booked on the David Webb show today. And Areva didn't know. But anyway, let's move on to our second crazy martini now, Jim. And this one's not nearly as much fun. This comes to us courtesy of The Hill, but it's a Hill Harris X survey. And in this survey, which was conducted January 12th and 13th, after newly elected Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called for the U.S. to raise its highest marginal tax rate to 70%, that a sizable majority of registered voters, 59%, support the idea. Women support the idea by a 62 to 38% margin. A majority of men back it as well, 55 to 45. The proposal is popular in all regions of the country, with the majority of Southerners backing it, 57 to 43. Rural voters back it as well, 56 to 44. Among Republicans, you think, well, that'll be rational, right? No, 45% of Republican voters say they favor it, while 55% are opposed to it. Jim, what in the world?
I guess the plan is that populism will eat us last, right? Here's the thing. And people will have different definitions of what populism is, but there's an old observation that people really, really hate a whole bunch of corporate CEOs because they're greedy and they're selfish, and they have a bunch of fat cats sitting in their corporate suites and their corner offices, and and then you observe they very rarely saw this kind of criticism of Steve Jobs. Bill Gates got less. When somebody invents or develops something that you use every day, like an iPhone or stuff like that, personal computers, things like that. When you build up a company, there's a little bit less fuming. Although you probably do remember seeing all the anti-globalization marches where everyone was holding up their iPhones. I guess you feel like those iPhones were built in Ohio or something. You built a different one. You bought the different ones than the ones that everyone else did. When you feed this sentiment, right, that the reason you're not getting where you want in life is because of the fat cats, it's because of the elites, it's because you don't end up like the crowd, the mob, the general populace is not great at drawing distinctions between the good rich and the bad rich. Now, the thing is that once you start looking into it, it turns out that a whole bunch of people in this country actually don't inherit their wealth. They're not idle wealth, living champagne dreams and caviar nights and all that stuff that they used to talk about in Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. You look at books like The Millionaire Next Door. A good portion of the people of more than $1 million in this country did so either by starting their own business and working like crazy, 80 hours, 90 hours a week to get that business off the ground and starting, and it flourished. It turned out successful. They may work in certain professions. Now, people might say, yeah, those financial hedge fund guys where they don't create anything. All they do is shuffle money around. A sentiment that's been around basically since the beginning of the Republic. I suppose I can see that, but, do you think your doctor makes too much money? Don't you think doctors deserve? They collect all that debt. They go through college. They go through medical school. They got to do a residency. You know what? If you could handle someone's spleen and they come out okay, I think you deserve a pretty darn good living. So it's one of those things where I think feeding resentment of the rich is the easiest and simplest and I think probably dumbest and most counterproductive attitude to flourish in the public. And it is more than a little bit ironic that so much of it flourished when we've got a self-proclaimed man who proclaims his net worth is more than $10 billion. running this. It's also very interesting to see people don't seem to have that kind of objection to the wealth of a whole bunch of other people in politics, as long as they agree with them or something like that. So I think there's this general demonizing of the rich that is not good for our politics, but it's unsurprising. But, this is why the Republican Party and the conservatives in general should not dabble in this demonizing of the rich.
Well, as you pointed out, Jim, a lot of people in that tax bracket are the people that own businesses and create a lot of jobs. And if those people get soaked to the extent that it's just not worth their time anymore, a lot of people who don't make nearly that much and who are only too happy to soak the rich are not going to be too happy anymore because they're just going to fold their businesses or sell them or downsize or whatever. The remedy seems to be right for them in order to avoid those types of tax benefits.
It's also worth noting, by the way, that there's this interesting, blurring of the line of who gets defined as rich when it comes to taxes. Like if you want to say billionaires, okay, no dispute, no two ways about it. Billionaires are very, very wealthy, right? Millionaires. Okay, although you probably have a bunch of people who are retirees who did so over, good saving and good investments over the course of a lifetime. And that's, is that wealthy? Sure, it's not the billionaire lifestyle, and it's, it's sort of thing where they've managed to save that money over the course of decades. And, it's one of those things where do we really want to punish people like that? Are people like that the problem in this country? Then you go to the standard classification we've seen in a lot of debates lately has been more than $200,000 a year. Now, if you're making $200,000 a year in your household, yeah, you're definitely not poor. You're probably at the very least on the upper end of the middle class. But you go to certain parts of the country, New York, the D.C. area, San Francisco, L.A., 200. You got a mom making 200, making $100,000. You got a dad making 200, making $100,000. That's middle class. That's upper middle class, but it's not super duper wealthy upper middle class. You're probably still in a circumstance, because of the cost of living. You're worried about your mortgage. You're worried about your car payments. You're worried about. There are parts of this country where $200,000 doesn't get you a particularly luxurious lifestyle or a life that most people would consider to be rich. And then when some people classify rich as high as making $100,000, which is, again, depends very much, very differently. If you're, in the suburbs of Texas or in middle America, $100,000 will go pretty darn far. You go out to central Pennsylvania, and you can live terrific on $100,000 a year. You go to New York City, $100,000 a year is really nothing special. In fact, it's probably on the lower end of a whole bunch of places, whole bunch of neighborhoods. So, how do most people define rich? They mean, probably making about $10,000 more than I am.
Yeah, exactly right. What do you make of the sneering way that the liberals try to make conservatives look stupid when they say it's not all the income that would be 70%. It's the marginal tax rate means it's just the part where you're above the second highest tax bracket that gets taxed 70%. Calm down, everybody.
Yeah, Reagan had this terrific anecdote about this. It's a variation of he used to do like 2 films a year. And he's like, if I do 3, I'll really make money. And then he ran the numbers and calculated he'd actually make less because it bumps him into the higher tax bracket and the higher amount of money, the sheer amount to be taken by taxes from that third film, because all of his earnings for all those films would be bumped into a higher group. It just wasn't worth it, and you don't want to create that much of a disincentive to being productive, to doing new things, to experiment. To new projects and stuff like that. It just doesn't make financial sense. Can you have progressive taxation? Sure, but you don't want to make those upper end ones going up too high. Plus, I think just the sheer moral argument of just how much of your money is the government entitled to at a certain point.
All right, Jim, on to our third and final crazy martini for today. And I guess Beto O'Rourke from Texas is telling Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I'll see your crazy income tax idea, and I'll raise you a whole constitution. Let's go to the pages of the Washington Post. Jenna Johnson is the reporter, the totally unbiased, neutral political reporter. Listen to the way she sets this up. Throughout the 2-hour interview, which was often interrupted by bystanders urging him to run for president, O'Rourke boomeranged between a bright-eyed hope that the United States will soon dramatically change its approach to a whole host of issues, and a dismal suspicion that the country is now incapable of implementing sweeping change. When asked which it is, O'Rourke paused. Quote, I'm hesitant to answer it because I really feel like it deserves its due, and I don't want to give you actually, just selfishly, I don't want a soundbite of it reported. But yeah, I think that's the question of the moment. Does this still work? Can an empire like ours, with military presence in over 170 countries around the globe, with trading relationships and security agreements in every continent, still be managed by the same principles that were set down 230 plus years ago. So, Jim, we heard it a lot in the Obama administration with why they couldn't send treaties to Congress and so forth. That darn pesky Constitution. Is it just not worth the hassle anymore?
Yeah. Now, let me just first preface this. Is it possible that this doesn't sound as we don't get the direct question that was asked to him? We get it paraphrased, and that sounds like a kind of half completed thought. The sentence begins one way, kind of pauses, heads down in a different direction. I think we'd all be well served if Jenna Johnson put out the audio of this exchange, because it's maybe we're putting words into his mouth, or he meant something very different than the way it came out. But all we have to go on is what the words are in the article, which certainly makes him sound like he's asking, can the Constitution really still work today? Which I don't know about you, Greg. What is the very first thing that every president does? They take an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. We do a whole ceremony with it and everything, right? It's kind of a big deal. So when you say, hey, this thing I'm swearing to preserve, protect, and defend, just don't know if it works anymore. Like it's curtains or something, or it's or a shag rug from the 70s. It's just so outdated. Look, I'm not even sure if Vox ever went down that road that far. And also the interesting comment there, comments about American empire. Look, I guess it's like your former Congressman O'Rourke. You make it sound like we're the Roman Empire, we're the British Empire, and we're out conquering other lands. Look, the vast majority in which we have a U.S. military presence in another country are not combat missions, right? It's places like Incirlik Air Base, right? Or Ramstein Medical Facility. Like all of our NATO allies, we do all kinds of joint training and designing to build relationships. Ironically, the Pentagon and the U.S. military has a very big role in U.S. diplomacy. And they take great pride in this and be able to work and develop partnerships. There's a reason we used to bring foreign military officers to U.S. Academies for joint training and special programs and stuff like that. It's not because we want to take over the world or indoctrinate the world. But if somebody has done a little stint in Annapolis, then all of a sudden that admiral someday in charge of that country's Navy might be on good terms with you. He's got happy memories of all that stuff. He's got friendship. He's got established relationships. This is all part of soft power, not power. And the idea that this is being treated as this, we just can't handle that today. As I put it today, I'd really love to know what in the Constitution Beto O'Rourke really thinks is completely outdated and unworkable in today's world. I'm going to assume the Second Amendment is in there. You kind of wonder if he would want to put in the First Amendment and hate speech, since that seems to be a very popular. Is it the separation of powers part that bugs him? I don't know about you, Greg. There's a whole lot in the Constitution I just love, and anything you don't like, hey, guess what? We have a process to change it. Yeah, it's difficult because it's supposed to be difficult, because you don't want the operating system of your entire government changing every 5 minutes. So again, maybe we're making a mountain out of a molehill. Maybe it's just kind of a brain fart. The rest of his interview was not exactly full of fascinating statements. Look, I too have said, hey, it's worth having a debate about ideas like, say, in our end of the year awards, I mentioned Orrin Cass's idea of, wage subsidies and stuff like that. That's fine. But if you're running for president of the United States, you probably need to do more than say, we should have a debate on X. You probably should say, here is my position on X, and here's why I think it's a good idea or a bad one.
Yeah, good point. In fact, here's another little excerpt from there. He represented El Paso in Congress, which I think by my geography training is right on the Mexican border. Quote, he said he believes that the border is already fully secured and that further investment would take it even further, quote, past the point of diminishing returns, pushing migrants seeking to cross the border illegally into more dangerous and desolate territory. Quote, you will ensure death, he said of Trump's proposed wall. You and I, as Americans, have caused the deaths of others through these walls, unquote. No, we haven't.
Well, so is this an argument against all of the existing border walls?
I guess so.
We have a couple 100 miles, and I guess he's saying that border immigration enforcement ipso facto is murder. To which I'd say, run with that. Good luck, Beto. The other thing about when you go look at, so he's really against the wall. Okay, good for you. La-di-da. every single Democrat up on that stage is going to say they're vehemently opposed to the wall. Right now, it is, many of us have pointed out, Chuck Schumer and the whole bunch of them voted for fencing back during the Bush administration, and that's what constructed a big chunk of it. And lo and behold, illegal immigration has gone down where they put up the fencing. And oh, by the way, Customs and Border Protection says they don't need the Great Wall of China from one coast to another. They just need another couple hundred miles of border fencing, the steel slats we've all seen on the news, and that will steer the illegal immigrants into the heavily patrolled areas, and thus we'll begin to really get illegal immigration under control and dramatically reduce the numbers. That's all they're asking for. Seems very reasonable. This is absolutely unacceptable to, I believe, probably every major Democratic presidential candidate running in 2020. Okay, fine, guys. The rest of that interview where O'Rourke sounds really generic, Greg, this really, my suspicion is that he's, people are saying, oh, he's vanilla Obama, right? You and I were around in 2008. We remember how centrists were completely convinced that Barack Obama was one of them, and the hardline progressives were completely convinced that Barack Obama was one of them. He was the blank slate that everybody projected their ideal onto. My suspicion is that Beto O'Rourke knows this is his route to the nomination and to the White House. But to do it, you have to not say anything, because the more you say things, the more people say, oh, wait, I didn't know he believed that. Oh, I don't like that at all. So the interesting question will be, how long can he go as this blank slate that other people can project their ideals onto? And I think this interview indicates it's going to be a little bit tougher than Beto O'Rourke thought.
Yeah, could be. But if he gets through the primary, he'll be fine, because as we found out with Obama,
after that, you are untouchable.
That's right. That's right. All he has to do is condemn whatever Trump says, and the media will love it. So, Jim, fun day as always. Talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to tune in again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.